Welcome to the Wander Women's Collective podcast. I'm your host, Gracie Hins, and today I am chatting with Rebecca Ricards, a family friend and incredible businesswoman, and just somebody that has so many adventures to share and chat about. She currently runs and owns a small business called RR Move Co., seamlessly moving seniors into retirement homes, and she's also spent time working with Doctors Without Borders and also working in Antarctica. So I'm super excited to share this story and conversation with you guys.
Well, do we want to just start off? Do you want to give a quick introduction to who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. I'm Rebecca. My last name's Ricards. I currently am a business owner, a small business owner. Um, but I don't know if that's what you're planning to talk to me about today, but that's sort of what fills my days and my nights and my weekends. It's kind of full on right now, but yeah, I live in Seattle
Yeah,
and
I
yeah.
kind of just want to jump into how what your whole life has looked like. Honestly, just starting from out of college because you've just had a handful of jobs. So I kind of just want you to walk me through what that's all looked
What
like.
that looks like. I know sometimes I feel like, oh man, having a whiteboard with markers, all different colors, because I'd love to see a timeline, and I'm horrible with dates. So sort of right out of the gate, I feel like I'm going to speak in looser terms, which is
That's okay.
probably more interesting anyway. But I graduated with a degree in speech communications and theater, which essentially means I'm I'm either like hugely employable or not employable at all because it's just vague enough that it's like I could do
Hmm.
everything and nothing. And I also just didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I felt like college was something all my friends were doing, and so when I went, I was like, I'm just going to keep learning what I love. And I knew I loved theater, and I thought maybe I wanted to be a journalist, like a television news anchor. That
Mm-hmm.
didn't didn't seem to fit. It's a very prescribed way of speaking and being. I was like, oh no, I want to be on stage. But I kind of realized that like, oh, there are very few people that get to actually live that dream. And I was probably scared if I'm being honest. So I was like, well, why I also had this wanderlust and this kind of adventurous part of me. And a buddy of mine had said, hey, you want to drive a bus in Alaska? And I was like, sure, let's drive buses in Alaska. So here I am with a fresh degree from a liberal arts university, a pile of debt. And I was like, yeah, I totally am going to go drive buses in Alaska. So we went up and I ended up staying. We just worked seasonally and I only drove buses for one season. That's not true. I was in Fairbanks for a season and then down in Skagway driving buses. But I loved it. It sort of scratched a few itches of I got to wear like that Garth Brooks microphone and had a captive audience of 40 plus people who were all just like listening. So I felt like I was on stage. I got to learn about the Alaska history and the gold rush, and it was incredible. It was just a really fun experience, and I realized that I could postpone or defer my college debt and just keep adventuring. So I would
Hmm.
save up money in the summer seasons and then go and travel and spend it in the off season.
Yeah.
And so that chapter lasted, again, I think about 5 years. And in the course of that, I did do some intermittent other jobs. I had a temp job down here in Seattle that it was back in the early days when not everyone had the internet. And my temp job was for a company called Photodisc, where essentially you would call this number and be like, hey, I'd like a picture of a cat playing with a ball of yarn, and I would go find it in our catalog. I would burn it
Oh,
onto
awesome.
a disc and then send it snail mail to the person so they could like make a brochure or put it on
Yeah.
their Christmas newsletter, whatever the thing they were going to use that photo for.
Yeah.
But it wasn't super busy, understandably. And I had just watched a friend of mine in a play here in Seattle called Terra Nova, and it was about the South Pole heroic age in the race to the South Pole. And I was smitten. I didn't know. I don't know if I learned about Antarctica in school and forgot, or I never learned, but I didn't know about it. I mean, I knew it existed and I knew it was a place on the planet, but I didn't know more than that. And so after the play, I was just so excited to deep dive. And so I had this internet at my disposal, and intermittently people would call and ask for me to burn a photo for them. But most of the time I got to like just start squirreling around and Googling Antarctica and learning more about its history. And then I found out you could work down there. I was like, what? This is bonkers. Someone will pay me to go down to Antarctica. And I looked at the website of the contractor who was hiring folks, and I qualified for all of nothing. And I was like, I can't drive a forklift. I don't know how to cook. What on earth could I do down there? And I saw this one tiny listing for a hairdresser. And I was like, well, I cut hair in college. So, for like 6 packs of beer. So I was like, well, maybe I could be a hair cutter down there. And oh my gosh, what a ridiculous thought, because of course you probably need to be licensed. And so I applied for 2 years in a row to go down as the hairdresser and never heard back, crickets chirping. I wasn't qualified. I had no business, but I was still going up to Alaska intermittently and met a couple who had been shuttle drivers down there, which essentially is a glorified term for a taxi driver.
Mm-hmm.
They drive these big rigs with big tires that are underinflated, and and they put me in contact with someone. And because of my bus driving days, I had a commercial driver's license. And it was kind of a fairly quick succession of steps that led me to my first season down in Antarctica. And I ended up doing 6 seasons down there over the course of about 20 years. But yeah. So Antarctica, I ended up I wouldn't even say burning out, but feeling like it's tough living out of a backpack, and it's tough hopping on planes and not really feeling like your roots get to go down very deep. And I remember thinking to myself, ooh, my next adventure is going to be living in a house and having a mailbox where I can open letters from a mailbox. Like that felt like my new adventure. So I rented a house in Seattle, and a friend of mine from college, his dad owned a retirement company that had 3 retirement communities in Seattle. And he got me a job as an activities director. And I actually remember my palms were sweaty because he wanted me to sign a 1-year contract with them. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know if I can sign up for 1 year. But that was sort of the stipulation. And I was like, well, at the very least, I might burn this friendship bridge if I can't handle it and I have to leave. But I didn't. I actually really fell in love with the senior demographic. I fell in love with being a part of a chapter in people's lives that I think a lot of people maybe gloss over or run past or can't slow down for, and loved it. So I stayed with the company for about 9.5 years, and they continued to give me new areas of responsibility. And I think they could tell, actually, Gracie, I think they could tell that I would get this itch every 2 years. I was ready to like either cut and run, and it was almost like they knew enough about me to be like, okay, Rebecca's ready for something new. So I was able to stay with them without feeling bored. And I guess then fast forward, we're now probably looking at like 2013. A friend of mine had started working with Doctors Without Borders, and she came back from an assignment and said, Rebecca, I think you would love this work. And again, I was like, well, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nurse. I don't know. Is there a place for someone like me? And I went to like an open house that they had here in Seattle, and they talked about all these different buckets that they have. They have logisticians, they have administrators, and I applied as an administrator, and I worked in the field with them. I worked in their US office in New York, and I was with them for about 8 years and got to travel crazy places. And then the pandemic hit. I'm doing a really fast forward. I don't know if this is what you would want.
That's perfect. I'll jump back into some of these.
Okay. And then 8 years had a similar like renewed sense that I needed to be planted again. Like it was
Yeah.
a super interesting chapter and a super heart-wrenching chapter and also a super exhausting chapter. And I don't think I realized how tired I was until I came home and the pandemic had uh, started, and I thought I want to just be home. I had a little house in Seattle and had been renting it out and thought I just want to be back in my home and do a few projects, putter around, get chickens again, sort of have a little backyard urban farm. I love to garden and hadn't really been able to do any of that for the past 8 years. And yeah, but I couldn't get a job. I like in my heart, I was like, I want to work for a nonprofit. I want to do good. I've just been so fulfilled and work has been so engaging that I'm not willing to sacrifice that for just any old paycheck. I was
Mm-hmm.
like, I could eat rice and beans for months until the perfect job manifests itself. And I was being pretty selective about where I was sending
Yeah.
my resume, but nothing stuck. And I think, companies weren't hiring in March of 2020. They weren't hiring in April of 2020. Most companies were just frozen in time. And
Yeah.
so I was realizing that I was doing some online training with Doctors Without Borders at that time. So I had some income coming in, but realized that that wasn't going to be what I wanted to do forever.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, then I realized I had these two sort of complementary skill sets, even though they didn't seem to be linked. I knew about the retirement industry. I knew about that chapter where seniors go and live in a community setting, and that there were a lot of them in Seattle. And then I also knew about logistics and sort of working in resource poor areas and being a bit scrappy and having to figure stuff out and realize that those two really did dovetail into this perfect solution to help seniors transition from their homes into retirement communities. And so I started a little company called RR Move Co. And we move seniors. We help plan their new transition. We measure their new space. We help them select furniture, whether it's some they already have or some they need to buy. And we do the whole shebang. We pack them, we move them, we unpack them and decorate their space. And it's
Mm-hmm.
been amazing.
Yeah. Well, it's also funny because I feel like I have talked to so many friends where I'm like, like there's people that that just start businesses that it's just like it just screams, this makes so much sense. And I always bring you up because I'm just like, Rebecca, it just makes so much sense. Like you look at everything else that you've done, and then it's like there's really nobody else that I can imagine doing what you've done so well. Like it
Mhm.
it just makes so much sense. Um,
Isn't it amazing? And
yeah.
and I would not have known that all of those sort of lily pad frog leaps that I did in my life would have brought me to this. I never thought I would. I didn't want my own business. I never thought I could or should have my own business. And yeah, and you're right. It makes sense to me too. It
Hmm.
totally is just like this is sort of what I was meant to do. And who knew all along that it was sort of like the paving ground for what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I definitely want to chat more about Antarctica and Doctors Without Borders because those two things are just like what? Like nobody gets to just go to Antarctica. Um, okay, what started the fascination with Antarctica in the first place?
So it really was that play. There's a
Okay.
tiny theater here in Seattle, and one of my buddies that I studied theater with in college was working with the theater and invited me to the play. And I happened to be in Seattle, and it was called Terra Nova, and it was Amundsen and Scott were two early Antarctic explorers, and they did
Hmm.
a race to the South Pole. And I don't know if you know the story, but it's a bit heartbreaking actually. But watching the play, I was just how like there are some things that just speak to you, and I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about Antarctica to know that it could speak to me, but I was on the edge of my seat, and I yeah, just remember thinking this is fascinating, and how have I never heard this story before, and
Yeah.
how am I so soft? Because these guys are so tough. But
Yeah.
yeah, and then I found out that I could actually get a job down there. It's not super easy to work down there because it's not a place that they hire many people. It's not a place, I guess, that many people even really want to go to. So it is a very like a niche calling. But
Mhm.
I think I'm pretty I don't even know the word, a bulldog. Like when I put my mind to something, I feel like I'm probably gonna do it.
Mhm.
If I lock on to something, I will probably do it. And Antarctica became my new obsession, where I was like, I'm gonna live my life. I'll keep showering. I'll keep eating, but like I need to get to Antarctica. So
Well,
yeah,
and then you
started
did
this.
kind of like a series of different jobs while like over those 6 seasons that you were there, right?
Yes, exactly. So
Yeah.
there was a little bit of the beginning part. So my first season on the ice, it's the austral summer. So you start
Mhm.
in October, you end in February. So I spanned over the season of 2001, 2000, no, 2000, 2001, I believe. Anyway, I'm not good with dates. Um, and yes, I did 3 seasons back to back. And in between that, I did travel and kind of spend the money that I earned. And it was after the third season in Antarctica that I came back and worked for the retirement community.
Okay.
Yeah.
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 Also,
And then
what
I
was,
then I had a big 13-year gap between
yeah.
Antarctica and ended up going back down there in 2017, 18.
Hmm.
Is that right? 18, 19, 19, 20. Yeah. And that was a trip to be gone for 13 years and then come back to see that a lot of my friends that were sort of the scrappy adventurers were now in these like high profile roles. And like, if you stay with the program long enough and learn enough about it, you're going to ascend. And then, the heartbreaking reality is 13 years down in Antarctica. Also, I saw ice melting and glaciers receding, and all of a sudden penguins were coming into town that didn't come into town before because there had been
Hmm.
some landlocked icebergs keeping that from happening. So there was some really cool things about going back after that stretch, and then some really really sad things as well.
Yeah.
Um,
What was kind of like the day to day?
It's weird that it's likened to it's a work camp. You work 6 days
Hmm.
a week. I think depending on the roles that you have, you work a lot, but people are so inventive down there. Like you figure out really ridiculous ways to have fun.
Hmm.
One that quickly pops into mind is a fashion show, kind of an alternative art gallery where people just take junk that's thrown away and turn it into like wall art. And one facet of that was a fashion show where I recall people taking there's a thing called skua where people throw away items that no one wants anymore. So you take skua items and skua is a bird that's down there, kind of like a scrappy seagull.
Hmm.
um, and just fashion it into like these really inventive outfits where there's this one that I'm recalling that had like caution tape as the fringe around it. And it's fun. It's actually really incredible to not have much and do a lot with the little that you have. It's a really fun position to be in. And I feel like that kind of describes Antarctica. People work really hard, they play really hard. It was
Hmm.
kind of like an extension of my Alaska chapter, where the scenery down in Antarctica is truly, I've never seen anything like it. If you love mountains, and I know you do, you see the most incredible mountain range right in front of the town. We were stationed in this little town called McMurdo, and
Hmm.
I knew nothing. I mean, I had told you I did a deep dive, but I knew no one down there. And they send you this handbook. So it's like, okay, you have to be kind of conservative with water and
Yeah.
bring biodegradable shampoo and pack very little because you have one little bag that can weigh 40 pounds for 4.5 months. And I'm like, got it, got it. So I was like checking
Yeah.
the boxes, got on a military C-130 airplane out of New Zealand. And I remember just being absolutely excited because I didn't know what to expect. I think I thought that it was going to be fairly flat and fairly white. And it was none of those things. It was all these like jagged peaks, and right on the little island that's ice locked onto the main continent of Antarctica. It's called Ross Island, was where
Hmm.
McMurdo is. there's this massive active volcano called Mount Erebus that is constantly puffing steam.
Oh my
And
gosh.
like I had no idea that this
Yeah.
incredible mountain is right there, right behind us. And the Ross Island is basically volcanic rock. And so there's not a ton of snow. It's super dry down there. So your skin, you
Mm-hmm.
instantly age like 15 years
Mm-hmm.
older than you ought to look.
Mm-hmm.
But I got off the airplane and it wasn't white. It was like 31 shades of blue. It was just the
Mm-hmm.
coolest. It literally took my breath away. And
Mm-hmm.
to this day, when people ask, like, what's the favorite place you've ever been? I can't really say favorite, but I think the one that for sure is top of mind because of its uniqueness and its beauty and its um, austereness is Antarctica. It's just, yeah, it's unparalleled.
Yeah. Yeah. I know it sounds crazy. And I feel like you've shown Sophie and I some of your pictures, but I'm just like it's wild.
Agreed. Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed.
What were you also kind of doing when, I mean, it was the 13-year span between the first time you were there and then the second time, but like
Mhm.
in those first 3 years, what were you doing in the off season? Was it more just, were you still doing some of the Alaska stuff then as well?
Yeah, yeah, I did some of that. I actually remember there was one year where I got to dip my toes in the Arctic Ocean. I went up to Barrow, Alaska, which is just at the very tippity top of Alaska, dipped my toes in there because I was too scared to get in all the way, and then went down to Antarctica and dipped my toes in the Antarctic Ocean. I was like, who gets to do this?
Yeah, yeah.
This is so crazy. So yeah, I did that a little bit. My folks actually were living in the Philippines. My dad was a pastor when I was growing up, and then they went to become missionaries in the Philippines. So I got to visit them a couple times. In that chapter, I remember doing a British Isles trip where I did a solo backpack around Scotland.
Hmm.
So I would love to go back. I feel like pictures are going to pique my memory of like I know I did some really cool trips and I know that I still part of when you have this purse of money, it's like it sort of fuels your necessity to go back to another seasonal job where you refill
Yeah,
your coffers and then go and spend them, and I felt like I was in that cycle. But you're right, I did 2 seasons where I did Antarctica and Alaska simultaneously and
yeah,
still had a couple of months in between the two
yeah.
to go play around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then wait, and then it was after those 3 seasons that you decided, okay, I should go back to Seattle and
Yeah.
have a mailbox.
Yeah, exactly. Have a mailbox. Hang some art that I've collected on the walls. Like just to have it isn't it funny to think that permanence became my new adventure? Like I
Yeah.
feel like that was sort of I was just craving some routine or regularity, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and in a way it's like it is a challenge in and of itself because
Yeah.
it's what you don't normally do.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah.
And I grew up, I mean, I lived in only 2 houses in my whole growing up, so I had a pretty stable childhood. So it wasn't like I was on this roll of we move every year, but
Yeah.
since college, I do think I was kind of you're right. I was on a fast trot to just keep moving, and that doesn't feel like it's sustainable, and I definitely started to get weary of it.
Hmm. Also, I'm curious, like, what were friends and family saying? Like, what were my parents saying while you were
Yeah,
doing
that's a
all of
good
this? Like,
question.
I'm like imagining them like in their Snoqualmie house, me
Yeah.
as a baby infant.
Yeah. I think, I never ever felt like anyone disapproved of what I was doing. I
Hmm.
never got that sense. In fact, it was so fun to come back and sort of share my adventures. And I would be curious to ask your mom and dad and to ask maybe other friends or family, but I kind of felt like they lived vicariously through me. Like I never
Hmm.
felt like they were bored of hearing my stories. I think it was fun for them to hear it, and it was super fun for me to share it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I do recall after the first season in Antarctica, my parents were like, "Wait, didn't you just do that? Do you have to do
Hmm.
that again?" I was
Hmm.
like, "Well, I don't have to. I actually just really want to. It's incredible." And my dad actually in the military was stationed in Greenland, and I think that without me realizing it, I think there was probably some subconscious
Hmm.
part of me that was like, my dad's an adventurer, I'm an adventurer,
Hmm.
and I had never really had him explicitly say, "Hey, you've got that spirit in you that I have in me." But I think that and the fact that they uprooted, they sold almost all their possessions and moved to the Philippines, and over the course of 20 plus years spent time in the Philippines. Not
Hmm.
full time for that whole time, but
Yeah.
so they have that in them as well, and particularly my dad.
Yeah. Okay. So then you jumped into doing the retirement stuff. When you took the transition from going from that to doing the Doctors Without Borders, did you think that you would come back to it?
No, no. In fact, I was really deliberate when I wrapped up my chapter with Doctors Without
Mhm.
Borders that I did not want to go back to a community per se. I
Yeah.
think that would have been a really easy leap. I had the resume to show I could do it. I loved it. I actually left the community or the company I worked for on really good terms. They were
Hmm.
I was sad to leave them. They were sad to have me go. So I feel like I could have rung some doorbells and had a job quickly, but it just didn't feel like a good fit. And I think that also maybe speaks to I'm not great at going back to a country I've been to or watching a movie I've already watched. I feel like,
Hmm.
gosh, there's so much out there. Like,
Hmm.
I don't want to necessarily, although I'm the girl that went back to Antarctica and then did 6 seasons. Um, but yeah, I didn't think that I knew I loved seniors though, and I knew that that was it wasn't that that was the tug, but when I pieced it all together, it was like this totally makes sense. If I get to work with seniors and I'm not in a community necessarily, it's the best of all the worlds.
You decide to start. What what was the first action step of starting RR Move Co? Wait, because when I'm like trying to remember now, like it kind of seemed like it was like an overnight thing where it was like, oh, now Rebecca has it. And I was like, whoa, what? Like this makes so much sense.
In fact, I think if you ask your mom, she was like, "Wait, you're doing what? You're starting what?" And I was like, "Wait, I thought I told you." And she's like, "No, you
Yeah.
didn't." Um, I so I had told you I was applying for jobs here in Seattle to, the Gates Foundation is here, the
Hmm.
Paul Allen Institute is here. Like there's a lot of great philanthropy organizations and or
Hmm.
philanthropic organizations. There's just a lot here that I felt like I could enjoy and that I would be qualified for. And that when that didn't happen, I realized I needed to get a job eventually. I was remodeling my kitchen, and so I was seeing my savings start to kind of shrink and like, oh gosh, I need to work. And a friend of mine who still works in the retirement industry told me that there was a woman who has a moving company, and that she moved seniors into there. And I actually, when I worked at my company, used
Hmm.
her. So I reached
Hmm.
out to
Right.
her, and I moonlighted. I did 8 moves with her, and
Hmm.
um, she wanted to partner up, and I at that point wasn't feeling like that was a good fit, but she gave me her blessing. She works more in South Seattle, and
Hmm.
gave me her blessing to start start something here in Seattle. And I realized that the overhead needed was super low, so the threshold to get into it was going to be fairly easy.
Yeah.
And of the same friend that reintroduced me to this move manager said that she had tried her normal source and she was busy for one weekend, and she's like, "This is your chance." And I had 3 days to piece together a truck, movers, and it was a holiday weekend, so there were no moving companies available to help us. So I packed her up by myself. I had a guy who was helping me with some yard work. I grabbed him and he grabbed a friend. I rented a U-Haul And we scrappily did that first move. I had another buddy who helped me unpack, and he's great with decor, and we pulled it off, and the family was super happy. And I remember thinking like that just happened. So Gracie, kind of like you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
it from the outside, I think people were like, how did she just do that? And from the inside, that's how I was feeling. I was like, how
Mm-hmm.
did I just do that? I just did a move.
Mm-hmm.
And I had picked up donuts the morning of that move at a donut shop, and there was a nondescript box truck that pulled up and three guys hopped out, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
say, you guys aren't movers, by the way, are you? And he said, well, yes we are, and handed me his business card. And so I had that in my pocket. And so then when I got another move
Mm-hmm.
sent my direction, I called them up, and they helped me for a year and a half. They were my exclusive movers, and they were fabulous. But as we continued to grow, I realized that um, I needed to go with a company that had a few more trucks and more flexibility with their staffing. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I've been in business now a little over 3.5 years. And it did sort of just start. It started fairly organically. It kind of started with me realizing that I needed to think about what my next professional steps were going to be. And I still didn't know if I was going to be a senior mover. I thought, let me just sniff around this area and see
Mm-hmm.
if there's a need for it, see if I like it. And it
Mm-hmm.
really did, it appealed to me in so many ways. Every day is different, every client is different,
Mm-hmm.
every need they have is different. And yeah, it's been super cool. And I also, because I have this inability to commit, as was evidenced when I first started at the retirement company, and they said, sign on this dotted line for 1 year. And I was like, what? A year?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
also told myself I'm going to try being a senior mover for a year. And if it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't feel good, if it doesn't um if it just isn't a good fit, I'm going to release it, and I'm going to give myself permission to try something else. And after a year, I was like, no, this actually is getting some traction, and I'm getting better at it and learning a ton, and I still really love it. Yeah.
What were like some of those almost like reassuring steps or like moments that you felt that first year that it was kind of like, okay, I'm feeling like, like, okay, yeah, this is
Yeah.
reassuring.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and there's probably two things. I realize how much I'm fueled by accolades. Like I I can know that something's good, and I can feel really good about our process and the results. But anytime we got a client or the client's family or the community that we were moving into
Mm-hmm.
say, wow, you guys you're good. This is the when we're done, the space is completely fleshed out. The art is
Mm-hmm.
hung, the lamps are turned on, the bed is made. And I do remember feeling like I know we're good, but when other people echo that or say the
Mm-hmm.
same thing, then I believe it. Like I only
Mm-hmm.
half-heartedly believe it when I feel it, but when someone else says it, then I'm like, yeah, we are really good. So there was that piece. I feel like we were getting a lot of really positive reinforcement from
Yeah.
the the people that we're working with and working for. And then secondly, I have a kick-ass crew. I remember that first year feeling like people were referred to me by friends,
Mm-hmm.
um, by other colleagues, by I have an acupuncturist, and she has a couple people she's referred to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like this type of work speaks to really good people, I guess. So I think when they hear about what we do, they're like, hey, I want to look into that. So I actually haven't had to be incredibly proactive about finding really quality,
Mm-hmm.
caring people to work with. And I think that first year when I realized that staffing, not that staffing takes care of itself, but that the right people are drawn to this kind of work. And so
Mm-hmm.
I've just been blown away by the fact that I have a crew that continues to make our Move Co this elevated experience for seniors, and it continues to make me look good. And I know it's not about making me look good, but when I have my name in the company, I do
Yeah.
care a lot about this process, and I rely a lot on the team that that executes the work, and they're just incredible. So I think those
Yeah.
two pieces, feeling like we were getting a lot of positive feedback, and I have a crew that works with me that are just dynamite.
When you were at the senior, wait, what's it? The living before you started this, before Doctors Without Borders,
Yeah.
um, do you feel like, do you remember like people being moved that it was like, oh man, like that process is just not effective? Or like, I guess what were some of the things too that you were like, okay, I can do this so much better, and
Yeah.
like I'm gonna put my own Rebecca spin on it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I just was recalling this to someone not 5 or 6 days ago, and I was a marketing director for a chapter of time there, for my biggest chapter there. And so I was the one that would give tours and show off the new space, and like, hey,
Yeah.
here's the swimming pool. And for people that don't know about retirement community living right now, they're getting ridiculously posh. Like there's some
Yeah.
very fancy ones out there, and the senior could fall in love with the community and see the perfect apartment that really suited their needs, and then they would sit on our wait list forever and ever. And when that apartment would come up again, I'd call and they'd say, yeah, we're just not ready. And it's like, well, what do you need to do to be ready? Like our
hmm
and I guarantee you, I'm not a mathematician, or this, I'm pulling this percentage out of
hmm
nowhere, but I would say 90% of them weren't ready because they were overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that they had in their garage and their guest
hmm
bedroom and their lower level of their home they never really enter anymore. And that daunting feeling was what kept them from moving into this new chapter where they could meet new friends and have activities right outside their front door and go up to tulip fields and visit Leavenworth. Like the
hmm
activity and programming there is incredible. And you can tell I'm a humongous fan of it because I feel like socialization is medicine for any of us, but particularly when you're a senior, if you've had a lot of your peer group has passed away, maybe you've had a partner pass away,
hmm
you start to isolate. You're scared to drive at night.
hmm
Your world kind of just keeps shrinking, shrinking, shrinking. And um, yeah, I think that, so as a marketer, when I was in the retirement communities wearing that hat of what is keeping them from moving, and it was 9 times out of 10 they were overwhelmed by the process. And I think a move manager is a fairly new concept.
hmm
We just haven't heard of it. We know that there are moving companies. If you're in the military, you have probably experienced someone coming and packing you up and transporting. But then when they unpack, they do what's called first surface unpack, where essentially like all your china gets unpacked and kind of put on your kitchen table. But even that's an elevated type of moving service, right? And that's pretty ubiquitous in the military, I think, depending on the level you are in the military. So some seniors have kind of experienced that before, but I feel like my biggest hurdle is educating people on what even a move manager is, because it's a soup to nuts. We basically take them from A to Z, and
Yeah.
they don't get it because we still have this very DIY concept of moving, of like, well, don't you just like whip up a pot of chili and invite your grandkids over and rent a U-Haul? And it's like,
hmm
well, yes, you can, but if you have all of the layers of emotional hurdles to get over, you have mental hurdles to get over, physical hurdles to get over, your family is busy, then
hmm
then a move manager is the perfect solution because we've done this before. We're doing between 10 to 12 moves a month now. So we're really good at helping to sort of demystify the process for them, but still giving the senior agency in it. They still get to decide what comes. We just execute their wishes and desires. And so it's that part has been just amazing to see, if the education. So I do a lot of downsizing seminars around Seattle, and a lot of helping people understand that if this is their hurdle, we can help you get through it.
hmm
And I'm not the only game in town. There are other people that do this, but yeah, it's exciting to help. If a senior is waiting to move because they're stuck, the I'm and the possibility is so huge that an emergency is going to necessitate their move, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
human beings, I think, are so reactive. And so it's like, if I don't have to move, I'll
Hmm.
get to my garage tomorrow. I'll get to the living room furniture tomorrow. And I think what ends up happening then is it's a fall down the stairs or something that ends up necessitating, like, okay, now you can't live in this split level home anymore, or yeah, whatever the thing can be. And so how cool if we can come in and be a bit proactive. So that's
Yeah.
sort of my like broadcast message, is like, ooh, let's get ahead of this. Let's let you be the one to pick the community you want to move into and the apartment space that best suits your needs.
Yeah, rather than that last minute stressful, oh, we need to get everything moved, and it's
Yeah.
not on the seniors' terms at that point, really. Yeah.
Exactly. I've had clients where we go in and we pack their closet, their kitchen, and we have to make selections because they have a
Mhm.
walk-in closet at home and they're moving into a kind of 5 foot standard wall closet in their new space. And we're making decisions for them. And it's so much better if the senior gets to be a part of that process. Yeah.
Yeah. What have been some of the growing pains of the business, like biggest hurdles that you've had to get through?
Um, I think that recognizing that, like, if something doesn't go quite right on a move, that it doesn't mean that I'm a bad business owner. It doesn't mean that we're not good at what we do. And I think sort of those little like voices that start to erode confidence, and there's a lot of moving parts to these moves. There's
Mhm.
um, I have an ops manager that helps with a lot of the background logistics of booking the movers and the muscle and making sure that the team they pick their own shifts, but still posting the shifts and the hours that are appropriate. But I'm still exclusively doing all the home visits where I first meet the senior. And we have some seniors that say, I can do the downsizing, leave that to me, the homework is doable. And then we show up on move day and they didn't do the homework because they got overwhelmed or whatever thing
Yeah.
happens. And then the move crew is not set up for success
Yeah.
because of that. And then recognizing that, like, I can learn from that. It doesn't mean that I'm not good at what I do. It doesn't mean that our move co isn't good at what they do. And so I think the biggest hurdle is probably that, of like just making sure that I'm separating out um, the fact that we continue to grow and continue to do an amazing number of really great moves, and not every move is going to go off without a hitch.
Mhm.
And that's just the nature of what we're doing. I also think that continuing to make sure the foundation is strong, making sure that I continue to put the client experience at the forefront and my team's experience. I really care about the team feeling supported and successful and
Yeah.
valued, and I care about the client feeling that. And I think
Yeah.
that if those two can continue to become my north stars, then I think we're going to continue doing really well. And I feel like, knock on wood, so far we're doing it.
What do you have any like where are you hoping to take it? Are you kind of at a point where you're like, we're steadily trekking along? Or are there things that you're like, okay, I really want to introduce this into the business concept or, like expand?
Mm.
Yeah.
I go back and forth because I think if quality is my objective, then it's hard to have quantity as well at
Yeah.
this stage in the game.
Yeah.
And I really want to continue making sure that the moves are quality, that we actually just did an unpack yesterday in a new community we haven't been in before. And I was able to go and meet the community's administrators and drop off some marketing material. And if we get too big, I think that kind of really deliberate marketing and specific touches and calling each client. I still call
Mhm.
each client after the move and ask them how it went and how they're settling in and how their first night went. And I think there's going to be a point when I can't do it all and I can't have those really customized touches and personalized touches, but I think there's a way to do it all, but I want to be really sure that the ratcheting up happens in a um, calculated, careful way. And I don't know what that looks like yet.
Yeah.
I have just brought on a part-time marketing person because I'm realizing that even though my background is in marketing and I'm not to toot
Yeah.
my own horn, but like this is what I do. I'm good at it.
Yeah.
I know marketing. I realize that I can't do it all. I can't keep doing all the home visits. I can't
Yeah.
keep having those next day follow-ups, and I think that for me to be successful, I have to keep trusting that the people that I'm bringing on board are also really good at this. And so
Mhm.
there's this element of like, oh man, I care so much about this, and I care enough to make sure that I don't burn out, but if I get hit by a bus, can this thing keep going? And I think that the cool thing is that yes, it can. I am definitely surrounded by really amazing people that know how to keep our Move Co going, which is exciting because that means that I'm going to be able to start traveling again.
Yeah, no, that was kind of going to be my next segue of like, how have you kept yourself from burning out the last
Mhm.
3 years of starting this? And like, I don't like, what have you been doing for yourself in the days where it's like, okay, because when you're starting your own business, it's all encompassing. Like you're
Yeah,
thinking about it from when
yeah,
you wake up to when you go to sleep.
yeah.
So how have you been dealing with just like being able to take that stress and do something for yourself during the day and like take a breath?
Yeah,
Or is
I
that
don't
still something that
think
you're working out?
yeah, I'm not as great at it as I probably should be. In my mind, I feel like this chapter is finite. It's
Yeah.
probably like
Yeah.
literally, I love the analogy of a baby because it's a little bit like I've never had kids, but I imagine when you
Mhm.
first have a kid, like they cry a lot, you don't sleep a lot, and you
Yeah.
know that like, hey, this chapter is going to pass, and soon enough, the kid sleeps through the night, and I don't have to feed him every couple hours, whatever the thing is. And I feel like this stage of my business has been just pretty full on. And I
Yeah.
knew that and I know that, but I'm starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel of, in the travel is still very important to me. I love getting on an airplane. There's probably, I don't know if there's literally endorphin rushes when a plane takes off, but I get so excited to travel. And so I have been pretty good at taking a couple big trips a year still. But what's happened historically with doing that is work skids to a halt because if I'm not here, I'm not doing more home
Yeah.
visits, I'm not booking
Yeah.
more moves. And so it has a kind of a repercussion. And
Hmm.
I feel like this is the first year starting out in well, actually the middle of last year, where when I left, I was able to have some help with home visits, and I had a team member that stepped up and was able to do a couple of those, and the wheels of the bus kept turning while I was gone, and it was just super exciting. And
Yeah.
um, I planned it. I actually hired someone to help me with a vacation exit plan, and it seemed a little ridiculous, but at the same time, I was like, I have to be able to really vacation. I don't want to be married to my phone. And so we had scheduled some calls every couple of days that I'd be able to check in if they had any questions so that I wasn't going to be pinged all the time. So I truly could
Hmm.
like turn my phone off and put it down. And that, while it felt really prescribed, was an amazing way to do it because it did mean that I was able to completely rest and relax on my vacation. And so
Yeah.
I think this year I actually haven't quite landed on where I want to go, but it feels like I'm setting myself up to be able to take another couple of really, I'm not going to say well deserved because everyone's been working really hard, but I'm definitely ready to take some more breaks this upcoming year.
Yeah. You're ready to get on a plane and feel the endorphins again.
Yes, that. Yes.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. We're getting a little bit close on time, depending on how much time you have. But what do you feel like? Were there comments like at the start of the business that like you heard that just kind of kept you going? Or like what were those reassuring things at the beginning of starting that you were like, okay, and I know that you kind of touched on that a little bit of like people are saying we're doing a really good job, but from
Mhm.
that first move when you rented a U-Haul.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. Because I had worked in retirement, I had interacted with people who have some cognitive loss or some
Hmm.
memory loss, and I also have a background. I had told you I was a theater major. I've done improv before,
Hmm.
um, and believe it or not, improv and memory loss are such a great partner. And I think one piece of feedback that was so cool to hear that I've been able to impart into my team is
Hmm.
when you're dealing with a senior who doesn't remember things and is maybe repetitive, or the process is overwhelming for them of joining their journey, and as an improviser being able to, they say something that's a little off base or that doesn't quite fit with the scenario, or is continuing to play back something that you've already heard, of
Hmm.
never getting in and saying like that's not right, or that you said that already, of, I guess, joining, yeah, I've said it already, but joining their journey of making them feel validated, making them feel again like they're the captain of the ship that's about to set sail, and
Hmm.
still in our careful and calculated way coming in and doing what we need to do, but never letting the senior feel like they're not part of the process. And I think we're really good at that, and I think the team is really good at that. And I've that was one of the biggest accolades we got from the family member, is that even if the family is sitting in the room while we start talking about the move plan, I'm always directing my queries, my thoughts, my comments to the client, which is the senior.
Yeah.
And the family just happens to be there. And I think what it does is it gives them an incredible amount of ownership in the process. And even if they don't completely understand the ins and outs of it, they know that they're included in it. And
Yeah.
the communities have also been really flattering about how that looks on their side of, when we walk someone through their space, it's a little bit like an HGTV reveal where we ask them to be gone. So we do the move in 2 days. We pack them on day one, we transport them on day two, and the
Hmm.
afternoon of day two is when we unpack and decorate. So by dinner time of day two, they're ready to come and see their new space. And it's particularly important for clients with some cognitive loss that we're taking time to like open up the silverware drawer, and because as much as we try to get things in a really similar spot, the configuration is often just quite different. And so when we need to, we'll use like masking tape on closet shelves to say, hey, here's where we put your wool sweaters. But that process of walking through their space with them and orienting them to their new environment is really profound and really important, because it's their home, but introducing them to sort of how their home has been appointed is
Hmm.
really meaningful. It's meaningful for the family, it's meaningful for the community, it's meaningful for our team. But I think ultimately it's really meaningful for the senior, the client who's making the move. And so that, I would say that that's kind of one of the pieces that stands out of how we do it and why we do it. And I hope that everyone who's kind of in this same industry does a similar thing, but I don't know that it happens because it takes more time. I need
Yeah.
more team members there to do it to that level. But I think it's just so incredibly important.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And ultimately, I this is a little bit of an aside, but I tell communities that if you're recommending a service like ours, it's not just benefiting the senior and their families, it's benefiting the community, because the senior is already moved in. They're not sitting around piles of boxes and that overwhelming, like, oh my gosh, now I have to actually unpack and get myself settled.
Yeah.
They can actually open their door and go out to happy hour and go out and start meeting their new neighbors right away. And their um, buy-in to that community happens so much faster. Their investment in their um, new home happens so much faster, and therefore their retention is going to be so much greater, right? They're going to feel more at home that much faster because of this service. So I just think it has this incredible 360 benefit that I
Hmm.
love.
Yeah, well, and what you were saying too of just like it's so important for the seniors to feel at home and have that
Mhm.
space that they're able to connect and like be social with people too. And so taking that and like streamlining it is like the
Yeah.
most important thing that you can do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Exciting stuff. Um, do you have anything that you would like to leave people with today? Whether it's in terms of just life, starting your own business,
Mm, mm.
any of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. I was talking to my mom. I went home for Thanksgiving, and I feel like there are people who risk and who reach and who um, jump out of airplanes, and then there are those who don't, who that's harder and scarier for. And I'm definitely in the category of like a reacher and a risk taker, and I think that I would also say for the people that aren't, that's not their go-to, that doesn't mean that you can't still do it. It just means
Mhm.
that your steps leading up to that point might have to be a little more refined or a little more thoughtful. And I love meeting people who risk, and whether they risk impulsively and quickly or they risk with more calculation. I just think that um, it's it's a pretty cool way to live, and I've benefited from it because I think I couldn't have done the things I did if I didn't stick my neck out. And I feel like I've lived a really full life, and I'm super excited about what the next chapter holds. But I also have such an appreciation for people that do it differently. And it doesn't mean that the risk has to be a trip to Antarctica. It could be that the risk for someone is, this is such a weird analogy, but that they're going to buy a different car than the one they're used to, right? Like
Yeah,
risk
yeah.
risk looks so different to so many people. And I think that just I love the idea that people can be uncomfortable and push themselves into uncomfortable places. And I think that that's where super duper growth happens. Um, and I think the more I encounter people who are different than me, it's so easy to be around other adventurers and risky people because that's who I am. But I also think it's so important to be around people who aren't like that, because I can learn from people who risk differently. And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't make it less impressive. It's just different. And I can um, continue to be in awe of people who risk differently.
Mm-hmm.
But I think risk is important.
Yeah, identifying challenge and going after it. Putting
Yeah,
yourself in uncomfortable places. Totally.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And comfort looks so different depending on who you are, but it doesn't mean that it's not discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think those are some good last words to end the recording on.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Once again, just let me know if you are still liking these, if you're not liking them. But yeah, I am so happy that you're here, and I hope that you have a wonderful Monday.